Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the regular council meeting of Tuesday, September 27th, 2022. City of Kawartha Lakes respectfully acknowledges that we are situated on Mississauga lands and the traditional territory covered by the Williams Treaties. We are grateful for the opportunity to work here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this place. We also recognize the contributions of Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples, both in shaping and strengthening this community and country as a whole. This recognition is connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our community. Can I get a motion, please, Councillor Riley, for the adoption of the open session agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moved by myself, second by Councillor Vail, that the agenda for the open session of the regular council meeting of Tuesday, September 27th, 2022 be adopted as circulated with the following amendments. Item 11.2, deputation of Minishabi Jashi, pertaining to the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for 69-71 Lindsay Street South, related to the agenda item 14.3.7. Apologize for the pronunciation.
Thank you. All in favor? That's passed. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest in anything on today's agenda? Seeing none. September 30th marks the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, a time for Canadians to reflect on the trauma caused to Indigenous peoples and communities across the country by the residential school system. In 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, released its final report, which included 94 calls to action to redress the legacy of residential schools and advance the process of Canadian reconciliation. In response to the 57th call to action, Kawartha Lakes has implemented an education program and continues to engage staff on the history of Indigenous peoples, anti-racism, and human rights. Further to this, a repatriation policy has been adopted by Council to address the repatriation of Indigenous artifacts and the sharing of archival information with Indigenous peoples. It is my great pleasure today, in recognition of National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, to welcome Chief Knott from Curve Lake, who has joined us for our flag ceremony earlier this morning. Thank you, sir. And we invite him to say a few words to council, if you would. Please, up at the podium. Somebody can turn that on for you. Christine, here you go.
They gave me a quick lesson here this morning, how to turn this on. Honey, bonjour. Hello, good morning. Mr. Mayor, it's customary for me when I say honey, bonjour, or hello or good morning, that everybody replies back. Honey. Now you're awake. Feels good now. How's everybody this morning? Very good, thank you. Mr. Mayor, thank you for giving me the opportunity and the invite to address your council this morning. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. And it's such a delight to see so much orange here this morning. And your signs that you have up gives me those relief feelings that we're not alone anymore. We have the support of others. It has been difficult for the first peoples of this land to survive. There has been so much discrimination over the many, many years. One big item, if anyone have ever heard of the Indian Act, we are the only people that is governed by an act in the entire world. They pretty well tell us what to do, where to do it, when to do it, how to do it. That's basically what the act does. It's been hard being the first peoples of this land, or Anishinaabe. We've been called everything. We've been called Indians, Aboriginals, Indigenous. Who else have received those kind of names in their lifetime? I've seen it all. This is why whenever I'm called to go and speak somewhere, I do not hesitate. If they would only teach Canadian history in our schools once in a while, we would know more and more about each other. We know more about European history, United States history, than we do our own. And I believe that some of this has come to light, as I see here today, the orange. Nobody ever heard of the residential school until a commission was developed to do that, bring out the truth. They talk about truth and reconciliation. We, the first people of this land, know the truth. We know the truth. Now it's up to those who want to know the truth and believe in the truth. And that's the only way I believe that we will succeed in reconciliation. And we cannot do that alone. We got to work that together, figure these things out. Think of those little children. Sometimes I get kind of emotional just thinking of it. Kids 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. The Indian agent come to the First Nation. Pick all these little kids. The parents never had no choice. That is the way the Crown, the federal government, dealt with us. They'd come into our communities, they always said, a big black car. And that's what they picked the children up. Supposedly taking them to learn a better education. They also said taking the Indianness out of the child. You know, it hurts just talking about it. Those little children, how they suffered. The number of unmarked graves that were found. And those who survived the residential school, not only did they have to overcome the torture that they had received, but how were they able to survive after that? How could they raise a family? The pain that they suffered, they moved, they got into other substances of abuse, such as alcohol and drugs. And you look at them trying to raise a family, they wouldn't have encountered any parent skills at a residential school. And if that is a way you're supposed to raise a child, then that would be the reflection that they got on how to raise a child. And then therefore, their children would be grown in abusive situation. So there's a long old healing process in this. And it's so grateful that it is being recognized and we are being listened to now on the results of what has happened. It's hard being a leader in a community and listening to some of the stories. How can you deal with some of these? How can you deal with some of these issues? I've been very fortunate as a leader of my community. I'm able to get along real well with my members. They wanted me back this time. I retired once from politics, but my community wanted me back this time. So that is why I'm here. Because my love for my community, my affection for my community. And that's what you need if you're going to move forward. You never think of the negative things. What you did yesterday is gone. Why worry about it? What are we going to do tomorrow? Why think about it? It's not here yet. When tomorrow becomes today, we'll deal with it. Yes, you can make all the plans you want. If that day comes for that planned day, then so be it. I live for the moment. I live for this here moment right now, in which I'm really grateful that I had an opportunity to come to Lindsay and raise a flag for every child. Not only the child from the residential school, but every child that is going through homelessness, that is going through hunger. This is why I say, if you got small children, even your adult son or daughter, give them a hug. They mean so much. They mean so much to us. Mr. Mayor, I really appreciate your acknowledgement, your council in the city of Lindsay for the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. We know every child matters. Every child matters. They will grow up one day, sit in these chairs, be a mayor one day. They will do that. But we also have to learn how to be passionate about it and bringing our children to recognize the importance of responsibilities, the importance of caring, and most of all, the importance of love and respect. You know, it's difficult. I always speak from within. I never have a written speech that I go by. I couldn't follow it anyway, if I did have one. But looking around here, and all the smiles on the faces, let all those smiles reflect back to their children when they put their arms around them and say, I love you. Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Mayor and Council. I really appreciate it. I never ever thought I'd be able to stand in front of a council or any group to speak, but the Creator has given me that ability to do so. Give me the courage, the respect to everyone. So I thank you all very much for listening to me. And I'll be thinking of you also when you lower the flag on a National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Amigas. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief, for sharing. I can assure you, on behalf of everyone here today, that you are not alone. I'm wondering if you'll join us for a moment of silent reflection. Thank you. Much appreciated. You're certainly welcome to hang out with us the rest of the day if you wish, Chief. Yeah, I bet you do. Thank you once again for sharing with us. It's much appreciated. Thank you. Okay, we're going to go down to item 5 on our agenda, which is deputations. We have none this morning. Presentations. Our first presentation is a presentation 6.1 on the Trails Master Plan. Jen Johnson and Claire Basinski from SEMA. Jen is our Manager of Parks and Rec. Are both joining us on Zoom. Can you hear me okay? Go ahead.
Yep, thanks, Andy. Good morning, Mr. Mayor, council members, and guests. Today, an update on the status of the Trails Master Plan will be provided. SEMA Plus will be providing that information through a presentation, and a staff report is included on in today's agenda package. This process began in 2021 and is set to wrap up early next year prior to the start of the spring-summer trail season. Following this meeting, the project team will confirm the recommendations and finalize the final report. I kind of wanted to take this opportunity just before the SEMA Plus team gets started, just to thank individuals and user groups that provided input into the plan. As well as the members of the community working group that provided feedback and direction throughout the process. Also wanted to recognize and thank Parks and Rec team members Shelley Cooper and Ryan Smith for contributing to the process. I see Claire's ready to roll there, so I will turn it over to Claire Basinski, Peter Brox, and Samantha Ledger from SEMA Plus to provide the update. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks very much, Jen, and thank you so much, Mr. Mayor and members of council, for having me today. We're really pleased to be here. Instead of going over the land acknowledgement, which you all already generously gave, I guess I'd just like to say thank you to Chief Knott, even though I did see him leave. Thank him for sharing his knowledge and his experience of history and healing, so we can be more aware and respectful in our future collaborations with the original peoples of Turtle Island. What an amazing day. And as we speak about trails, what an amazing opportunity to have very grassroots opportunities to highlight how we can be collaborative and integrate knowledge and history going forward. So thank you so much for that and for the opportunity to be part of this council presentation today. Moving forward to the next slide, Jen already gave a wonderful overview of what we're going to be speaking to today. As she mentioned, I'm joined by two of my colleagues who together we have been working diligently on the Trails Master Plan update over the past almost year or so. We will be going over a bit of context of what we've been doing and how we've been doing it in terms of updating this plan, but we will be focusing mostly on the recommendations that we're entertaining and presenting to you for information. And as was noted before, there's still a little bit of work to do to wrap this up in terms of preparing the actual document, the Trails Master Plan update, but we really see this presentation and forthcoming information to be the final opportunity to consult and engage with yourselves and other stakeholders around what we hope to see as part of this master plan, which will ultimately be the guide for trails going forward over the next 5, 10, 15 plus years. Next slide, please. So what are we trying to achieve through this update? You may already be aware, as I'm sure you are, that in 2006, an original Trails Master Plan was undertaken for the city of Kawartha Lakes. And this was quite a foundational document. It set out quite ambitious goals in terms of trails, planning, design, implementation, funding, etc. And so it's really wonderful to see that the city is looking at this plan and is wanting to put a critical eye to how we want to update it to ensure that we still have that foundational document going forward. So as we went through this process, there were 4 different components of the update, if you will. Not all of the plan was completely inapplicable anymore. Of course not, a strong foundation there. So we wanted to maintain some of those pieces. Some pieces were somewhat out of date, but still somewhat applicable. So we wanted to adapt those components. There were some pieces that were missing relative to new best practices or comparable best practices. So we wanted to see some of those pieces upgraded and other new components that might not have been addressed through the plan that we learned would be helpful going forward. And those are new development pieces. So those are the different components of how we framed the update to the plan and how we've been guiding the work that we've been doing. Next slide. So how did we undertake the plan in terms of our timeline? Jen had already mentioned when we started the plan and we're looking to wrap it up, not necessarily November 2022, but probably early next year, as she mentioned. The core piece of this plan is actually a foundation in engagement and consultation. And that was really important for us because, as was acknowledged before, there is a strong base of very impassioned and wonderfully contributive stakeholders throughout the city that are very aware and knowledgeable of trails and very passionate about what they want to see in terms of trails going forward. And so our process and our technical work was very much underpinned by the input that we received and the discussions and collaboration that we had with those stakeholders. And I thank Jen for acknowledging those groups and identifying some of them because it's been a wonderfully collaborative process to date. Next slide, please. A master plan, as I'm sure most of you may know, is underpinned typically by and founded based on a commitment or a vision that states the ultimate aspirations that we'd like to see in terms of the future of what we're talking about, and that's the vision statement. And it's also further defined, that vision is defined by a set of principles and objectives, which provide more articulate directions of exactly what we want to see achieved. And the 2006 plan already had a vision and a set of objectives, but we wanted to make sure that that was refreshed to really reflect what was applicable currently in terms of trails, future, and vision, and also making sure that we had enough direction and foundation of what we wanted to achieve in those principles and objectives. So I won't go through all of them, but you see here elements of recreation and fun and accessibility and safety and comfort when it comes to trails, but also health and connectivity. And the objectives and principles are really meant to further define what those are so that we can reflect those in our recommendations and in our directions going forward. Next slide, please. We spoke a little bit about the engagement that was undertaken throughout the process, but we wanted to provide a little bit of detail in terms of what we did and what we heard throughout the process. There were 2 rounds of engagement that we undertook, and the first one was really to introduce the plan update process, try to define that vision and principles, and to gather any information on what exactly individuals and stakeholders wanted to have reflected in the plan. We had some great turnout in terms of different events, not just working sessions and meetings, but public sessions and one-on-one dialogues. It was really quite clear to us in that initial process that there were quite a few concerns, specific locations, concerns about potential conflict and comfort and safety from those different contributors. There was also a great sense of optimism and wonderful excitement about potential improvements and a continued commitment to trails. So it was really wonderful to see, yes, maybe some critical discussions about what we need to do to make it better, but also some wonderful optimism and excitement about what we were going to be doing and how we can improve it. Next slide, please. And in the second round of engagement, we came forward with more of the recommendations and some of the initial thoughts on locations for improvement and design. And this is where we were really gathering more of the concrete feedback on what people wanted to see recommended through the plan. We were excited to get input on those different concepts, yes and no. We were excited to get more collaborative ideas on how we could improve what we were recommending. We were excited to see that we were going in the right direction in terms of some of these areas of improvement, but that maybe there were some other ideas that stakeholders wanted us to consider going forward. And we were happy to incorporate those where we could through the next steps in the process. Next slide, please. So how did we get to the recommendations that you are seeing in this presentation in front of you? We started from the original 2006 plan, and we used the vision and the objectives and principles, as well as the engagement and the input that was gathered throughout the process to put a critical eye to the original 23 recommendations that were in the 2006 plan. It was interesting to work with staff to go through that process because it was great to look at what was previously recommended and to try to think about how we wanted to respect that, reflect that, and improve that to some extent. So out of the original 23 recommendations, some were implemented, around 6 were implemented, 7 are considered somewhat implemented, and 10 were not implemented. And out of all of those 23, there were some that were still applicable, some that really required some reconsideration, and others that were no longer applicable. And that happens when it's been about 15 years since the original plan. And so not surprisingly, there were some that were not necessarily applicable because maybe some legislation has changed, some best practices have changed, the direction has changed in terms of the priorities and principles of council and staff. There are more funding opportunities. There are more opportunities to really try to push the envelope in terms of trail development and implementation. So it was a great opportunity to try to respect and reflect what was in the original plan, but to also think, where are we at now and what can we do to make this a plan for 2022, 2023, and going forward? Next slide, please. So when we started thinking about the new recommendations that we were going to be entertaining and putting together, we focused on 6 core elements. And this is somewhat similar to what was in the original 2006 plan in the sense that there were sections or categories of recommendations originally identified, but some of them were quite specific in terms of the area of focus. For example, there was a piece of legislation that was trying to be put forward about lines, and that is quite specific, and we felt we needed to bring it up a little bit higher to help staff and to help those who are implementing the plan have different components that apply to their day-to-day work and the types of topics that need to be addressed when implementing a master plan. So we have trail infrastructure recommendations, design recommendations, education and outreach, costing and funding, implementation and management, and maintenance and evaluation. And those weren't just things that were identified through discussions with staff, but those are great best practices and principles that most successful or really effective master plans tend to focus on. And we'll be talking about the context of those recommendations going forward. Next slide, please. So how did we develop the recommendations? I won't go in too much detail because it was quite an iterative process for both. But what we did was we tried to make sure that there was rigor and thoughtfulness and engagement in coming up with each of these recommendations. And so for the infrastructure design and implementation recommendations, we really went through a very traditional network and infrastructure development iterative process where we started with the existing conditions, built on what needed to be updated, and went through a process of reviewing and evaluating different options and alternatives before confirming what we were recommending for those different categories. And when it came to education and outreach, costing and funding, and maintenance and evaluation, that more has to do with understanding what practices are happening now internally, how they can be improved, what some of the best practices are out there, and how those could be incorporated or adapted within the City of Kawartha Lakes context. So it was a really collaborative process, and the intent was to, again, build upon that engagement that we had, but also work with city staff to identify exactly what would be most effective in terms of recommendations for trails going forward. So we'll start on the next slide with the initial set of recommendations in context around trails infrastructure. So what you'll see in terms of our recommended trail improvements is a focus area based approach that identifies different types of project categories within those focus areas. There are 11 focus areas for trail projects within the City of Kawartha Lakes. And within those focus areas, there are different types of trail improvement projects, so upgrades to existing trails, trail management projects, so improvements to how the trail functions as it's managed or it is provided guidance in terms of overview, trail links, which are new trails that we have identified, as well as trail comfort projects, which is improvements to connectivity as well as use by different users. So you'll see these 11 areas are dispersed throughout the entire city, and there are a range of different types of projects depending on the intent and purpose and the desired experience when it comes to trails within each of those focus areas. It would take us more than the 30-45 minutes that I have to go over each of those projects. So on the next slide, we have just a bit of an overview of some of the stats of what we're recommending. And I encourage you to take this away after, if you haven't done so already, to really sink your teeth into what we are recommending. We have a wide range of different projects in each of the various focus areas. We have the most trail management projects, and that really respects the fact that you have a strong foundation of amazing trails within the city already, but some of them just require a bit more direction in terms of who's using them, how they're meant to be maintained and monitored, and how we want to ensure that they are effectively managed going forward, followed by new trails that we are thinking would really enhance the overall experience and the benefit of trails throughout the city. The kilometers are an interesting look just in terms of what we are improving and where, but it's really just trying to emphasize the fact that we have, as you'll see on the next slide, a wide range of projects dispersed all throughout the city. So in both urban and rural areas, almost equal split between the north, south, and central areas of the city as well. That was a huge commitment for us. And in terms of who we're accommodating, we really are focusing on trying to provide more opportunities for the range of users that we have within the city, which was a really wonderful learning experience to work with each of those groups. But as you'll see, lots of opportunities for active use, for ORV and ATV use, but also some shared experiences as well. So again, our commitment here was really trying to make sure that we had a balance as much as possible, and that each of the user groups, as well as all of the individuals within the city, really felt like they had access and opportunity to see improvement in trails to meet their needs. So on the next slide, you'll see a summary of the recommendations that we have that pertain to the projects that we are recommending for implementation. And it's not each and every project that we're going through here. These recommendations really are meant to support staff in how we continue to use and guide implementation of trail projects going forward. We want to see these projects embedded in larger municipal land planning documents, the official plan, to make sure that there is teeth with them. We want to make sure that there is consistency in terms of how they are implemented, and making sure that we are always monitoring opportunities going forward. We have 11 focus areas and we have a number of different projects. Those weren't actually all of them. There are many other wonderful ideas that were raised throughout the process, and we want the city to be able to monitor those and to leverage those where we can going forward. The stars you'll see are some of those core recommendations that we really feel are critical to the success of the plan, and you'll see that throughout. We go throughout the rest of the slides. Next slide, please. Moving on to design, the second category, and wanting to highlight how we frame this. We frame this based on 3 different categories of trail classifications, trail types. It became very clear through the process that we needed, and there was desire for more clarity and direction on how we design trails and how we accommodate different users. So we developed these trail classifications starting with a consideration of users first and incorporating those as best as we could. Next slide, please. As you go through the process, there are details associated with each of those trail classifications, which will help to guide staff and those who are ultimately designing trails going forward in how to consistently apply these classifications, whether it's improving an existing trail or building a new trail. Next slide, please. The trail classifications are further underpinned and supported by a series of signage and wayfinding guides. From a design perspective, signage and wayfinding was identified as a critical communication and education, as well as design consideration. There's lots of different types of signage that we recommend for implementation as we are improving and implementing new trails. There are different locations where that can happen, and we're really wanting to encourage universal application, whether it's from a look and feel perspective or from an application perspective in the different locations that are needed along the various trails. Next slide, please. In addition to that, signage is only one component of what are called amenities for trails, and those are the different features of design that enhance comfort and safety along a trail. There's all different types of amenities that we have identified, whether it's for a comfort and safety project or an overall enhancement project throughout the different focus areas. And we will be looking at how to guide application as well as identifying their locations throughout the overall improvement areas and focus areas. So when it comes to design, next slide, we have a lot of foundational recommendations that again are really intending to incorporate and ensure that this design guidance is used consistently as we go forward, making sure that they become part of standards that are applied, and making sure that we are keeping up to date when it comes to different design guidance and ensuring that we are incorporating those within the trail implementation as we move forward. And also the last point I wanted to note was that there already is a really wonderful collaboration that's happening with local developers, and we really want to make sure that that is continued and supported going forward. And these types of classifications, I think, will really help to guide how those are designed more consistently as you move forward with some of those projects. Next slide, please. I'll now speak to education and outreach. And education and outreach is sort of the softer side of some of these projects, but hugely critical in terms of ensuring that people are aware and knowledgeable and excited and enthusiastic about trails going forward. We identified throughout this process that there is some great foundation already there. That's a theme you'll probably hear throughout this presentation, but there is some inconsistency in terms of how education is done, who's doing it, where it's distributed in terms of communication. And we want to really bring that into a more central location and make sure that there's dedicated funding and opportunities for more coordinated efforts and excitement to be raised around trails throughout the city. And so you'll see on the right-hand side that there are a couple of ideas around what sorts of programs and initiatives could be undertaken collaboratively with tourism and other key stakeholders within the community. And those will be really supported through a more detailed overview of those initiatives and how they could be implemented within the master plan report update. On the next slide, we see those supporting recommendations for education and outreach. We really want to base this in stewardship and collaboration in making sure that stakeholders feel like they have a role and a voice at the table when it comes to supporting and educating and encouraging around trails. So this component sometimes can get lost, but we're really trying to elevate this profile in the master plan update as much as possible to ensure that there isn't just projects being done, but there's awareness around when they're being done, celebration about why they're being done, and enthusiasm around future use. Next slide, please. It wouldn't be a transparent process if we didn't talk honestly and openly about the costing and the funding associated with what we're recommending. We acknowledge that everything comes with a ticket price and that these projects over a 20+ year horizon can seem somewhat daunting when it comes to the funding and costing. We know that there are already opportunities in place for existing funding avenues through your budgeting process, but there are new recommendations and new initiatives that we are recommending, which would require an enhanced practice around costing and funding, as well as more consideration as we proceed with implementation. On the next slide, you'll see an overview of exactly what we are recommending in terms of the construction cost for these types of projects. It's based on unit costs that are at the master plan level that have been developed with collaboration through city staff, as well as based on other best practices. This doesn't necessarily reflect the other supporting projects or studies that would need to happen to actually facilitate the implementation of these, but it does give a general sense of what we may need over the full period of implementation from a construction perspective. We've tried to identify and be as transparent as possible similarly about how this is broken down, as you see on the next slide. There are investments in all areas of the city for all different types of users, which was our commitment. It is more onerous in terms of coming up with those improvements in some of the more northern areas, which is why you see those costs a little bit higher, but that doesn't reflect the value or the importance of the investment. These are all really wonderful projects. They just have different unit costs and prices associated with them. All of those details will be provided to the city and will be encouraged to be used as we go forward and updated as we needed to make sure that it is as relevant and applicable as possible as we proceed with implementation. So in terms of the recommendations on the next slide, you will note that we are identifying for your consideration a new budget line item dedicated specifically to trail investment. And that is something that is different than what we are doing right now. And that is to make sure that over the 10 to 15-year timeline, we are able to implement that breadth of projects that we are recommending in a way that is reflecting the commitment that we have hopefully made to improving and investing in trails going forward. We also have identified a new line item to support the education and encouragement around trails, as we talked about a little bit earlier. Sometimes that can get left out, so we want to make sure that that also has its own line and its own commitment in terms of support. We also would be remiss if we didn't identify budgets and costs associated with maintenance and management. And so while there's already a budget associated with that, we also want to make sure that we enhance that in an appropriate way to ensure that city staff are able to support in the maintenance of trails going forward and have those supports from an operational perspective. We really do encourage an annual review and an annual reporting on what is happening as much as possible. We are identifying these costs and making these estimates right now, but things change and continually change with time. And we really want this to be as much as possible an evergreening process so that this plan remains applicable 5, 10, 15 years out as much as possible. Next slide. When it comes to implementation management, and you'll see some consistencies in the messaging between the next couple of slides, we want to make sure that this is a flexible blueprint that is provided to staff, which gives the direction on how and what and when to implement based on what we've been hearing and what we've been doing throughout this entire master planning process. Next slide. We've developed phasing and we've prioritized projects that are based on what we have heard, based on what's already being planned for and implemented throughout the process, economies of scale as much as possible, coordination and balancing of different types of projects in different areas, and a realistic dispersion of cost over time. We're committed to seeing about 20% of the projects happening in the short term, as you can see, and then building out towards later in the process. And we have identified our top 5 priorities that we believe really reflects what we're hearing from the community in terms of necessary improvements and enhancements to trails that will really address some of the great opportunities, but also some of the concerns that we have heard loud and clear throughout this entire process. So in terms of the implementation recommendations on the next slide, there are quite a few critical recommendations that we feel are here in terms of supporting the day-to-day coordination, whether or not that is identifying a new staff person or enhancing that staff role, looking at making sure that there is an evergreening approach based on annual reporting that we can provide to you as City Council, and ensuring that we are able to monitor and manage what we are doing, looking at making sure that we are leveraging our opportunities for encroachment or acquisition or easement to find those opportunities for new trails. And last but certainly not least, the coordination between the different departments that are working on these plans that are intrinsically intertwined. By that, I'm referencing this Trails Master Plan update, but also the concurrent active transportation master plan. So we want to really make sure that there are processes and practices in place that allow us to have a longer lifespan and an evergreening approach to this master plan. Next slide, please. And I had already mentioned some maintenance and evaluation, but we want to know what works and what doesn't work and how we need to improve and what that looks like over the years following hopeful adoption and implementation going forward. So we do really want to make sure that there is support for our ability to evaluate the trails, to monitor what is happening on those trails, and embed a process and an annual practice and update to be able to communicate and report on what that looks like. And so looking at not only what the details are from how much does it cost to maintain, but what those practices look like, and also trail by trail specific report on how we need to improve and what we need to do. So once again, on the last slide of recommendations, there are supporting recommendations on what we need to do from a maintenance and management perspective, more focusing on what those standards look like and how we can really embed that into annual reviews, annual updates, and ways to make sure that our stakeholders and our city staff members are working together to evaluate and to ensure that there is a strong improvement in evergreening of trails as we proceed with implementation. So I have spoken for far too long, and I'm sure there may be some questions because there are so many slides here and lots of context. But once again, we're really looking to provide this to you for information, to let you know what we're considering when it comes to trail recommendations as part of the Trails Master Plan update. There has been a huge amount of work gone into this by stakeholders and other technical agencies and city staff. We would not have been able to create these recommendations without that input. And we're really excited to be able to culminate all of that work in the development of the Trails Master Plan update, which we will hopefully bring to you at the end of the year or early next year for your consideration and hopeful adoption. So thank you so much for your time. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thanks for that, Claire. Appreciate that. In-depth look at our Trails Master Plan. I'm just going to ask for a motion from council to receive the presentation, and we'll see if there's any questions. Councillor Deputy Mayor Richardson, second by Councillor Helmsley. Any questions for Claire on the presentation? Deputy Mayor Richardson, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you. You've given us a pretty comprehensive cost analysis, and then one of the slides did allude to there's funding sources are now available that were not available previously. I was just wondering if you could explain a little bit more about those. Thank you.
Happy to. Thank you very much for your question. Through you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of those sources, what we were able to ascertain from a review of capital budget and operating budget is that there is currently about $100,000 that is dedicated to trail maintenance, as well as other projects that are identified on an annual basis based on project planning by city staff. So for example, a trail improvement or a new trail is identified, it would come up on an annual basis for, we would like to see this amount of money put forward to do this project. What we would like to see, as opposed to just on a one-off basis, is that $500,000 put forward on an annual basis every single year to be able to facilitate the implementation of the projects that we've identified. So that would be new. So instead of seeing a line item of this trail, it would be trail projects, 500,000 of which city staff could use that monies to facilitate implementation of the different trail projects we've identified. So that's one of the examples. The other is the $50,000 that we have identified for trail education and encouragement. So that isn't something that is identified right now, and we feel will be really helpful to supporting the communication and outreach around trails, which we heard was somewhat lacking and would be really a huge benefit to stakeholders and people who live, work, and play within the community. And then the last one is an enhancement to that maintenance budget. So that's not new, but it is for transparency and enhancement of about $100,000 to $200,000 for maintenance of trails based on the current 100 that's there.
Councillor Helmsley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Couple of things. The costing is certainly interesting, and during the course of the public consultation, there was notice of how things might be changed in certain areas. I noticed that when you costed by, I think, 10 or 11 areas, but you didn't talk about the individual projects and what the costs would be for that development. Is that coming later, or will we only see the cost per area?
Thanks very much for that question through you, Mr. Mayor. No, absolutely. We have costing for each and every project that we have identified. We didn't want to overwhelm you with all of those details today, so we went with the focus area summary, but there's a detailed spreadsheet that we have provided and will be providing a final version to staff, which goes through each project, what we're recommending for improvement, what those unit costs are, what the final cost could be, and also we'll be incorporating some of those other costing considerations that you would have seen on slide 24, I believe, where we speak to what inflation could look like, what some of the permits and approvals may need to be, additional studies, etc. So details absolutely have been developed, will be incorporated into the master plan. Just didn't want to overwhelm you with slides and slides of those details today.
Thank you for that. Mr. Mayor, after the presentation is received, I'd like to make a follow-up motion, please.
Okay. Council's not endorsing the plan here today. And so the costing is going to depend on what the ultimately future council endorses as part of this plan. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. Okay, Councillor Dunn.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of questions on costing. So the first item is what we spend in total on maintenance plus any special projects that are identified during that fiscal year. We're going to just put them all in one big lump sum and just make that a permanent base funding. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, not maintenance, but those special projects, yes, that would be the intent.
So does that mean that we're going to have no longer going to have special projects? Because what I find is when we consolidate debt or consolidate spending, the next year all of a sudden we have new and spending that's not in that package, this new little package because it's special. So are we going to recommend that we abandon everything that's special for the next 15 years?
Pardon me, through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't think that would be the intent. There are some great successes in what you have there. I think what we're looking for or trying to achieve through this is a little bit more consistency in terms of what council is committing to every year as a base for trails implementation. So I could see that we would still have some line items for special projects because we want to remain flexible. They may come up, they might not be part of this plan. It may be something that we hadn't anticipated that we wanted to explore in more detail. So I don't want to have your hands tied by any means that way or reinvent the wheel at all here. It's more just finding another opportunity to have some consistency in terms of commitments to trail funding in addition to the special projects.
So what we're doing is we're creating more spending room for the future by lumping it all in one pile. Wow.
Exactly.
Okay.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. And I know it's a lot to take in. Pardon
Oh, no,
me.
I understand perfectly. It's not a problem taking it in. I've gone down that route both in my personal life and in other functions that I've been involved in, and I know how we just shift dollars around so we have more room to borrow and create more money. Okay, so my second question is, you talk about your 43% active transportation users. Now, we know how, and we're fairly successful at it, how we receive funding from our motorized people. They pay us, they make large donations. What is your plan for having that 43% pay their fair share?
Excellent question through you, Mr. Mayor. A lot of those tend to come more from other governmental funding sources. So there is a federal active transportation fund that we'd be looking to. Now, again, this is trails, so it's not as though trails couldn't fall under the AT fund, but we do want to be careful there. So we are looking to other opportunities as well. So there are some other healthy community funds at the provincial level, as well as some of the new federal funds that we're seeing where we could leverage some of those opportunities. But I think one of the things that we want to also encourage going forward is more of that discussion and collaboration if formalized groups come forward. And I'm thinking Kawartha Land Trust here and their great work and their involvement in trail improvements and enhancements through different forest tracts in different areas, whether or not that's a similar dedicated type of funding that we currently receive through the ORV and the snowmobile groups, or it's something where we can collaborate on a project by project basis. It will look a bit different, but I do definitely see for the AT side of things there being a governmental side as well as a kind of public-private partnership opportunity.
So the plan is to continue letting the motorized users pay their fair share, but the general taxpayers through various grants pay for the rest. So do we have any plan that the active transportation people are actually going to pay anything besides what they normally pay through taxes, which everybody pays?
For you, Mr. Mayor, that's something that in terms of the details, we're going to be ironing out over the next couple of months, how specific we want to be. It's, I'm sure you can appreciate, a little bit difficult when there aren't as organized groups as what we have for the wonderful motorized stakeholders that we engage with right now. But that's definitely something that we're going to be exploring in terms of how people can contribute and how we can work together to implement the projects that way.
Okay, now these trail, I forget the terminology used, but I'm going to call them trailheads or whatever, staging areas. Does that mean we have a plan that we're going to have these staging areas and then we're not going to have connectivity anymore? Or we're going to have staging areas plus we're going to continue having the trails connected as they currently are?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So in terms of the staging areas, a lot of those projects that were identified are enhancements to trail start or end points that are currently on the network or that are currently on the ground right now. I hesitate to use the word network when it comes to trails because out of their inherent locations, they're usually in, as you know, forest tracks, along old right-of-ways, in parks and open spaces, along old rail lines. Sometimes you can't always get the connectivity that's there. The intent is to use signage and wayfinding to help guide people to and from different trails, and to also use what is being done through the active transportation plan, where there will be on-road links that are identified for different active transportation users, or what has already been identified through the ORB task force in terms of on-road motorized links to be able to create that connectivity. But it is an interesting conversation when it comes to trails around how much connectivity you can use. We're not suggesting any changes to the current alignments to trails. We are only meaning to enhance them so that they can be more comfortable and safe for different users, or adding more trails to improve the overall experience of trails throughout the city.
Well, first of all, I'd have to get an ATV that's worthwhile driving, and then I'd have to join CATFA. But anyway, let's assuming those two things are now in place, and I go to the staging area at Superior Propane. Now, does that mean I can hop on my bike and go down to Thunder Bridge Road, or is this plan some sort of interference of that plan?
So in terms of the specific alignments, obviously we weren't able to put all of the details of exactly what we are recommending and where in the presentation just because of time constraints, but we do have all of those details within the mapping that we've created. We'll be happy to share that with council so you can see exactly what we're recommending. We have tried where we can to make sure that there are the trailheads and the staging areas to allow for the transition of different users and to allow for more routes to be available for those different users. What I can say is that we didn't get a chance to recommend each and every single idea of a trail that came forward throughout this process. And that's because we were already a little bit daunted by that $7 million plus tag. And we wanted to be cautious and prioritize some of those critical linkages. And so I think what we'll see is that maybe some people may question why we haven't done one or another. I'm not using yours as the example, but why we haven't done one or the other. Those don't go away. Those are still part of the database, part of what we're considering. But it's just not part of this base recommendation because we think that could be something that will need to happen later on down the line.
Councillor, I've got other questions. Are you going to wrap it up? Your 5 minutes is, go ahead. Yep.
One more quick question. I understand that how you haven't got all the staging areas figured out. Do you have any of them figured out? And if you do, can you give me an example how that impacts?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, we do. And again, we don't have the maps here, and I'd love for you to take a look at them. But in terms of the specific staging areas, you'd see those under trail comfort or trail management projects on those maps through each of the focus areas. So we have a number of them identified, and we have some that we had hoped to recommend that will stay as part of the record.
So, but nothing as far as connectivity goes?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would say that connectivity is inherently achieved through the implementation of all of the different types of projects, along with the existing trails that are already in place right now, and then will be further enhanced through the network that will be created through the active transportation plan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Ashmore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Claire. Thanks for the presentation. I just have a quick question on the management of these trails. I'll give an example down in Omimi where our trails go into the Trans-Canada Trail, and when you want to try to communicate with who's running the Trans-Canada Trail, it gets difficult at times. Was there any research or any work looking into how we can kind of marry these two together and get better coordination of who looks after the trails and who we can get in touch with? Because not all the trails are organized or managed by the city, and it makes it difficult sometimes when you have an issue on a certain section of a trail. But if it's in the Trans-Canada Trail, well then, I'm just wondering if there was any work done on trying to harmonize everything, make it easier to manage.
Great question through you, Mr. Mayor. So the Kawartha Trans-Canada Trail representatives were invited to each of our stakeholder meetings and came prepared and open to discussion as well. As you may be aware, Jen is an active participant on their committee meetings. So she is very aware and brings back to city staff what some of the issues are. And there was an ongoing discussion about what could be done through this project. So when it comes to the Trans-Canada, we have identified specific improvements along and at different points where members of the committee have identified the need for those improvements. I would ask Jen if she'd like to add to this, but our understanding and our recommendation is that there continues to be the same relationship going forward, whereby the city is supportive of the committee in terms of the work that they do. The committee is also concurrently committing to finding other sources of funding to be able to facilitate those projects or to bring forward new ones. We have in our detailed implementation database identified for each and every project who is responsible for what and what would need to be done. So that would help both with implementation as well as management. And that goes for the TCT, that goes for any partnerships with Snowmobile Club or the ATV Club, any of those where we have been as explicit as we can about who will be doing what in partnership with the city.
Deputy Mayor Richardson, follow up.
Thank you, and through you. At this time, I also want to commend the group because you can definitely see some more inclusion across the entire city of Kawartha Lakes when it comes to projected projects. I just want to clarify, it says the finals coming Q3 2023 in the report, but there was a mention that it could be before the trails open in the spring. Just looking for a time frame. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of when we are wrapping up our work as SEMA Plus, we'll be preparing the report by the end of this year for confirmation with city staff, and then we hope to bring that to council in early 2023. But in terms of maybe some of the work that the city is doing, Jen, I'm not sure if there are any more details that you wanted to provide there.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. Yeah, Claire, you're exactly correct. The plan is to present the final report early next year. And that just basically aligns with kind of the bringing on the new council. We certainly could have something prepared for the end of this year, but as far as timing goes and having a new council on board, it was decided that the best timing would be the beginning of within Q1 of 2023. So that's where that date has been derived from.
Thank you. Councillor Riley.
I'll just be brief. Tracy, Councillor Richardson, Deputy Mayor Richardson, just actually asked the question I was going to ask the timing around. And I just want to say thanks to all our staff, the members of the committee. You see some of our members of our committee have joined us here today. So for all their hard work and their great ideas, and it's certainly a work in progress, and look forward to the end result.
Thank you. We have a motion to receive. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you, Claire, for your update. Much appreciated. 611 is the report that, oh, sorry, you had a follow-up motion from the presentation. Go ahead.
Well, I guess it should be after the report, if that's okay.
Agree.
Okay.
Thank you. The report, the recommended motion is just a follow-up to the presentation that report PR 2022-004 Trails Master Plan Update be received for information at this time. Moved by Councillor Seymour Fagan, second by Councillor Vale. Any questions on the report? All in favor? And that's passed. Follow-up motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would make a follow-up motion that under the auspice of trail design and trail infrastructure, that ATVs be removed from the trail for use from Garnet Graham Park to North Line Road. And if I get a seconder, I'll speak to it.
Councillor, I have a suggested motion for that.
Okay.
I was going to do a follow-up myself, so perhaps I can read it, and if you
Please do.
so choose to move it, covers all the bases. that the final Trails Master Plan identify the section of Victoria Rail Trail from Garnet Graham Park to North Line Road, restricting all motorized vehicle traffic and travel during the summer season, and that any necessary bylaw be forwarded to council to implement this decision effective the 2023 summer season of trail use. I think that identifies what you're looking for.
Would it go from, I think, April through to November?
Summer trail season. May 1st it opens, it ends end of November? Right.
Okay, I'm good with that. Yes, I'll make that motion.
Okay, moved by Councillor Elmsley, second by Councillor Vale. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When ATVs and motorized vehicles were allowed on the trail, going back, I guess, to amalgamation, there were fewer of them and they were less intrusive, and there were fewer people living along that section of Cameron Lake. Over the years, and especially the last 2 years, where we've experienced COVID and more people have come up here and more people have come up here to work when they couldn't go to the office, the trail has seen increased usage and increased number of people living along that area, and it has now become problematic. It's not unusual for me to receive 5 or more complaints a day from people living along there about ATV usage, about noise, dust, danger to children and pets and walkers and bikers. And it's not that we don't have another route for them. We had explicitly given side-by-sides the option of traveling through Fenelon, going up 121, going up Coburn Street, 121, and then either going to Superior Propane to access the trail, or going along North Line Road and accessing it from North Line Road above. What I'm suggesting is that the ATVs, all ATVs take that route. It's therefore not restricting the ATVs in any way from traveling through Fenelon. It actually gives them more access to amenities such as gas stations and restaurants. And we welcome ATVs in Fenelon Falls. We have everything they need there, and we do welcome them. However, we would like to exclude them from this approximately 2 kilometers of trail for the peace and enjoyment of people who live along that area. Also, in the public section of this study, it showed 3 different options for that area, but ignored this option. And the 3 options that were shown would seem to be quite expensive options. So I would suggest that this is a far better way of managing the problem. It allows the ATVs the access they want through Fenelon Falls. It also speaks to the comfort and living conditions of the people who abut the Victoria Rail Trail. So I'm hoping that Council will agree and ask that this recommendation be included in the final report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vale, you seconded it. Let's go ahead.
Councillor Elmsley's covered everything. I'm fine with that.
Thank you. Councillor Dunn, question?
Yeah, I'll give you a motion to defer until the 2023 council. These motions are made by people that potentially, at least one of them is not going to be here, and potentially 2 of them are not going to be here. Let's have this decision given full vetting in 2023 by our brand new council.
Okay, motion to defer. I got to accept it. Moved by Councillor Dunn, second. Councillor Ashmore, till the 2023 report comes back. Okay, it's not open for debate. Call the question. All in favor? Motion fails. Back to the original motion. Any other speakers on Councillor Elmsley's motion? I'm going to speak to it. Sorry, your motion failed, Councillor. I'm going to speak to it. I think this should be the easiest decision council's had to make in the last 4 years. This is not a compromise. This is the best of both. This benefits the most people. This is taking the ATVs, which want road access. We're still giving them road access through Fenelon Falls. You're still giving them access to all the businesses that they want to access in Fenelon Falls. And you're creating a section of trail where there is conflict. And yeah, you can put it off until the new council, but why not implement it now? It should have been implemented years ago. It was a recommendation in the last Trails Master Plan. And it's not a negative for anybody. It creates an area along the river, along the lake, in Fenelon Falls where people live, where people walk, where kids bike, where kids play, and it's a very narrow part of the trail, and there is conflict there. And it's not conflict because most people are racing through really, really fast. Some do, like everywhere else. It's just conflict because there's not enough space on that trail to accommodate both users. And we have an opportunity to reroute them around through Fenelon Falls and give the best of both worlds to everybody. And I can't understand why we wouldn't support that. I think it's a win. I've talked to some ATV users who have no issues with it whatsoever. It still gives them access through Fenelon Falls. That's really all they're looking for. And it creates an area of safety and comfort for some of our residents living along the lake who can enjoy, a motorized, less conflicted area. And again, it's not because most people are abusing the trail. In some cases they are. I'm getting the same list of complaints. To say that this area works or that there's no conflict there is wrong. There is, and unfortunately, we have an opportunity to give this direction to the Trail Master Plan group, and when they come back next year, they can figure out how's the best way to implement that through bypasses, have some different options for the new council, but it's giving direction on something that, in my opinion, should have been done a long time ago. So that's my thoughts. Councillor Dunn, you had a follow-up or another follow-up question?
Just a comment on the original motion. The trail's narrow there, from what I understand. Well, actually, I've walked the trail, so it is narrow. But the reason why it's narrow is over the years, we have permitted major encroachments on that trail so as to make it smaller. The trail plan should be looking at, they want to spend $7 million. Why not spend some of that $7 million there, return the trail to its original size, where we can have corresponding routes. We can have routes for people to walk and cycle, and routes to ride ATVs. This proposal takes away some of the restaurants downtown, and I just think that this is the big hoorah for people leaving council, and I think we should wait and let the Trail Master Plan come up with a way to see.
Councillor, let's deal with the facts. Let's not deal with what you think council's trying to do before they leave office.
I
Thank you.
apologize for that. Everybody can make their own decision. But I think this should be decided by the council that's going to have to deal with it. One way or the other, there's 5 new councillors. 5 of the faces sitting at this particular table here won't be back. And yet we're making decisions that are going to bind them, and I don't think we should.
Thank you. Councillor Deputy Mayor Richardson, go ahead.
Excuse me, thank you, and through you. I was leaning towards, waiting till the next term of council, but I'm asking Councillor Elmsley right now if you think this is the right decision for your community at this time.
I do, and the reason I do is all we're doing is recommending that when this Trails Master Plan comes back, it have that in it. The council of the day obviously can make changes, as they often do. So I think this is something that needs to be explored, because during the run-up, when we had the consulting with various groups, it was not presented as an option. So here it is as an option, taking away the others. It gives them all the access to every part of Fenelon that they can have. So I think it is the right thing to do.
Thank you. That was your follow-up. That was your sum up. Thank you. I'm going to call the question then. All in favor? Motion passes. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move into item 6.2 is our next presentation, the Fenelon Falls second crossing update in Fenelon Falls. Lots going on in Fenelon Falls. Juan Rojas, our Director of Engineering and Assets. Welcome, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. So this is just a brief update on the Fenelon Falls second crossing. We started this project back in mid-2019 and concluded it this year. So the project follows a prescribed municipal Class EA process. So this is an overall summary of the entire process. The Class EA is broken up into 3 potential projects: an A or A plus project, a B project, and a C project. And each of them have different elements of the phases. So for a municipal Class B project, we're required to do phase 1, phase 2, and phase 5. Phase 5 being implementation, being actual construction. So the study was completed under the phase 1, phase 2. That was completed mid this year with a notice of publication. The notice of publication is attached as in an appendix to the staff report in this agenda. So we did break up the project into 2 streams. One is the location of the second crossing, whether it's a bypass or in town, and the second stream being improvements to the existing intersection of Helen, Lindsay, and Elliott. So 2 different objectives under one municipal Class B EA. So this slide shows the summary of the first objective was to determine whether an in-town or bypass crossing would be preferred in Fenelon. We held several public meetings, but ultimately the study concluded that a bypass through Somerville 3rd would be preferred. Some of the summaries of that investigation: it looked at property acquisition. Even though the bypass does have property acquisition requirements, it is significant less than the in-town crossing options. The bypass also requires upgrades to the roads leading and exiting the bridge, as well as maintaining ATV connections, boat launches, and other environmental impacts that are assessed with crossing a natural watercourse. Requires further review of bridge design for consideration, and that's really more for land acquisition. So once we get into the detailed design and EA specific of this location, we will flesh out potential environmental impacts and land requirements. The cost was in the middle range. We have estimated it between $6 to $9 million for the bridge. Again, in your report, in the staff report on bottom of page 3, there is a detailed list of all the projects and the cost and timing associated with the various projects, along with an identified funding source. And most importantly, we did look at relieving truck traffic or heavy transit traffic through downtown Fenelon and utilizing the bypass. We estimated that we would redirect 20% of the overall traffic, and that's a very conservative estimate. But most importantly, using this as an alternative haul route or a route to get traffic, heavy trucks, around Fenelon Falls. So the second stream, and the next 2 phases are for the second recommendation, it looked at the intersection improvements irrespective of the second crossing within downtown or within Fenelon Falls area. In particular, the Helen, Lindsay Street, and Elliott corridor. So change the Sobeys Tim Hortons access via Lindsay Street to become northbound right in and right out. Remove the ability for a southbound traffic on the bridge to turn left onto Sobeys access onto Lindsay Street. remove the ability for vehicles to access Sobeys Tim Hortons by driving straight through the intersection of Helen Street, remove the ability for traffic to drive straight out of Sobeys across to Helen Street, and remove the ability for traffic to turn left out of Sobeys onto Lindsay Street. Again, with the various traffic analysis that was done at this intersection, this was identified as a severe bottleneck for traffic flow through downtown Fenelon Falls. So this is the improvements to Elliott Street, essentially widening the road and having a dedicated left turn lane and an alternative entrance into the Tim Hortons Sobeys Plaza. So next steps, as I mentioned, there is a detailed list of about a dozen projects, over a dozen projects, in the table at the bottom of page 3 of the staff report that goes into more detailed timing. But at a high level, the design of the reconfiguration of the Lindsay-Helen junction is proposed in the 2023 capital budget that will be approved by the new council. Also the design of the Elliott Street turning movements is in the draft proposed 2023 capital budget. A new Schedule CEA, and this is something that has changed with the EA Act. When we started the project in 2019 to now, there has been some modifications to the Municipal Class EA Act, in particular when it comes to crossings over a natural water course. So this particular EA that we finished did identify a preferred solution of a bypass, a location, but then we would have to do a deeper dive into the actual bridge at the Somerville 3rd, geotechnical, property acquisitions, span of crossing for navigable water, and so forth. So we're proposing to do that EA in 2024. And then followed, so currently we are doing a Municipal Class CEA on the existing bridge that's there. If you recall, that's a large rehabilitation project. As part of that EA and detailed design that's been awarded to DM Wills, we will maximize the width of that road in order to provide additional storage southbound. We will improve pedestrian movements for the sidewalk location. That is currently being worked on, and we anticipate that the detailed design will be completed by the end of next year. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, Juan. I'll get a motion to receive, and we'll see if there's any questions. Councillor Elmsley and Dunn, thank you. I have a quick question, Juan. So where you've got the summary of recommended changes, because this came to council before, we had a discussion about not implementing all what we're going to remove, which to me seems like we're removing every ability to get into Sobeys, but that's another discussion. But then we had a discussion about that, but in your next steps, you're proposing that design for Helen Street and Lindsay Street intersection within the 2023 capital budget. So are you proposing to bring forward the 2023 capital budget implementing those recommended changes, or based on council's discussion that probably not where we want it to go and completely?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So in 2023, we're only proposing design, not construction, and that design will follow the recommendations made by council.
Thank you. Councillor Elmsley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, you expressed my concerns about getting into Sobeys, and I know you're talking about the bridge and being able to maximize its use and the stacking back. And when we discussed it before, would it not be better for everybody if the traffic lights at the corner of Helen and I guess it's Lindsay Street there, had an advanced green to accommodate the left turn into Sobeys. And then when we moved down, one of the recommendations was to put a light at the corner of Elliott and Lindsay Street, which of course would put traffic lights about 100 feet apart, and seems to me to be excessive, especially seeing as how we just did a crossing further down at the Fela building. And I'm all in favor of widening Elliott Street and doing something about getting the traffic that stacks up there into Tim Hortons and out in a goodly amount of time. So those are my concerns about that particular option, and maybe you could talk about it and see if there is another way to go.
Councillor, those concerns, we had that discussion. We passed that at council, so I think that's what the director's talking about. That's what's coming forward. It's right in the report, the left turn signal coming out of Sobeys and no traffic lights be installed at Elliott and Lindsay. We've had that discussion. Council's already made that decision. So anything to add, Director? Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, you're correct. That was council's direction. And when we do the RFP for the design of the intersection, we will include that direction in the RFP.
Thank you. I guess my only other concern is I thought that the EA for the bypass was going to be in 2023 and not 2024.
So the draft budget for 2023 doesn't have it included. Again, council could debate that, accelerate it as they wish, but that is staff's first shot at the draft budget. It's not approved by any means, and it's subject to discussion.
Thank you. Councillor Seymour Fagan.
Thank you. Through you. The Somerville 3rd is actually my ward, and I've had constituents who are very concerned about this. They have brought me down there where they're looking at putting the bridge and showed me where the flooding has happened over the years. Like in the span of the bridge is what they're saying is these are farmers who've been there for years, would have to be huge to actually, I know this will be fleshed out in the EA.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, the span and the height in order to conform with the major storm event or flooding requirements will be looked at in the EA, the next EA, as well as improvements to the roads leading up and exiting the bridge.
Okay, thank you. The other question is, we have a bridge in Bobcaygeon, and we have no guarantee of keeping the trucks off of it. How are we going to do that in Fenelon Falls?
So there's a few ways of doing that. If it's trucks for aggregate, we do have a haul route or an ag secondary plan that we could utilize. We could restrict roads either seasonally or year-round in Fenelon Falls. So there's different mechanisms to restrict heavy loads if required.
Thank you. So they already have routes that they can go around. Is there not a way that we can do this without having an additional bridge? Because there are ways that they can go around from the quarries up in, again, my area.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so potentially there are other ways with enforcement, but the intent of the EA was not solely to look at aggregate traffic, but traffic in general. And even if you eliminate heavy trucks, there is still a need for an additional crossing in Fenelon, just due to seasonal use and growth in Fenelon Falls.
Thank you. Councillor Dunn.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about Sobeys. So how do I get out of Sobeys? I come out of Sobeys, I turn right, I cross the bridge. So if I come from the south end of town, does that mean I cross the bridge and then turn around and then come back and cross the bridge again? Is that what the plan is?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, there is a northbound right. So if you're going northbound on Lindsay Street, you could enter Sobeys There's a northbound right, so it's right in, right out is what's being proposed, and then an alternative entrance through Elliott Street.
Okay, that's the one I was looking for, was the other, yeah.
Yeah,
I see how I get in. I don't have a problem getting in, but when I'm coming out, according to the picture, I'm turning left, which means I'm crossing the bridge, and I want to go the other way. So there's a route I can cut across and get over to Helen.
So through the mayor, they're proposing an alternative exit through Elliott Street, and there is an existing exit off of Clifton Street at the back, which
Okay.
hardly anybody uses, but it's there.
All right, okay. No, just as long as I don't have to go right to turn left. That's all I care about.
Do you shop at Sobeys?
I have.
I have too.
Once or twice.
I have too, and I don't want to go left to go right, or right to go left. I agree. Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, we have a motion to receive the presentation. Thanks, Juan. All in favor? That's passed. We have a report, ENG 2022-032, Fenelon Falls Second Crossing Update be received. Moved by Councillor O'Reilly, second by Councillor Elmsley. Any questions, comments on the report? All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you, Juan. We'll move down to item 6.3, which is an update on the roads needs information and roads 5-year plan presentation. Mr. Farquhar is going to join us, Manager of Technical Services. He's looking pretty sharp today, Mike. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. This report reviews the roads needs study that was commenced in 2021. So the city undertakes this assessment of its road network every 5 years. The terms of the study were laid out and summarized as below. The assessment review of the condition reviewed approximately 2,700 kilometers worth of road within the city's network to provide a cost for improvements to the road sections, to prioritize the rehabilitation and replacements of needs within these road segments between now, 1 to 5, and 6 to 10 year needs, to provide a life cycle costing analysis identifying road segments for preventive maintenance, which would help extend the road network's life, as well as updating the city's GIS database and collected information. The methodology for the collection of this information for the roads needs studies was based on the MTO inventory manual, which did a visual inspection of the entire road network. This inspection reviewed the road base, surface condition, surface widths, surface types, drainage, alignment, maintenance demand for these road segments, as well as breaking them into critical deficiencies identified as now 1 to 5, 6 to 10 year needs. The roads were also within this study classified into a roadside environment as well as class. So roadside environment is broken down into a rural, semi-urban, and urban, and your class is broken into local, collector, arterial. For example, the picture to the upper right is CKL 10, where it's identified as a rural arterial road with a paved shoulder. And below is Kent Street, which we would identify as an urban arterial road. Now, through this study, we also updated our traffic volumes based on the previous counts and updated seasonal growth within the road network. So as a summary of the road network, it's broken into two kind of categories between road surface type. So we have approximately 852 kilometers of hot mix, so asphalt roads, 957 kilometers worth of surface treatment or tar and chip roads, and approximately 895 kilometers worth of gravel roads. And then it's further broken into your roadside environment, which is between rural, semi-urban, and urban, where your rural road network is consisted of 2,309 kilometers, semi-urban, 265, and 130 kilometers worth of urban. Oh, there we go. The summary of the findings. So two primary indicators of relative health of the road network are structural adequacy and your surface condition. The current average structural adequacy rating of the city's road network is approximately 4.3 out of 20. Slightly better than the 2016's 13.5 that was reported in 2017 to council. The current average surface condition rating for the city's road network is approximately 7.6 out of 10, which is approximately equal to what we reported back in 2017. 6%, 158 kilometers of road network, has a structural now need. 12.4%, or 334 kilometers, has a 1 to 5, and 14.2%, or 383 kilometers, of the road network has a structural requirement of 6 to 10-year need. And so those numbers pertain to just your hardtop and asphalt roads. It doesn't pertain to your gravel road segments. In 2016, the city had 326 kilometers of road with a structural now need, 342 kilometers with a 1 to 5, 430 kilometers worth of road between 6 and 10. So this suggests the city has made improvements in utilizing its last 5-year plan and in keeping its adequacy close to or improving. Within this roads needs study, we have identified approximately $116 million worth of now needs and 1 to 5-year needs. So before you is the deficiency map of the network, which outlines the now needs 1 to 5 and 6 to 10. I believe we have provided just an overall larger.
There's a bigger copy in everybody's folder if you want to have a look. Yeah, sorry, Mike.
Yes, sorry, yep. And as well, if the clerk can maybe just click on the hyperlink. So this is provided as well, Council, just for visual purposes. It's just a hyperlink to a Google map we've made outlining all the deficiencies within the city's road network. So if you'd like to just zoom in. So it's it's just for visual reference, but you can zoom in. You get a perspective between the reds is your now, your yellow is your 1 to 5, and the light green is your 6 to 10 needs within that network. So going forward, the approach to developing the proposed 5-year plan took the same steps that had been done in 2017 and presented to council. The roads needs study was used as a guideline for developing the 5-year plan based on the identified now, 1 to 5, and 6 to 10-year needs to be addressed in yearly capital programs of urban-rural reconstruction, urban and arterial resurfacing, rural resurfacing. The plan does not deal with the resurfacing gravel roads, as those are addressed in the current 10-year capital gravel plan. The plan utilized past criteria for from the previous 5-year plan. They are as follows. The projects take into account the consideration of the road sections and priority based on the underground infrastructure and coordinating with water wastewater projects, as well as recommended EA or municipal class EA studies. For example, the Fenelon Falls bridge crossing. Life cycle initiatives for prolonging the operating of life of a road segment. So those are small localized overlays, slurry seals and microsurfacing, resolving operational maintenance demands within a road section, so high areas of patching requirements, boundary road segments. So these are locations where we have coordinated boundary roads with municipalities like Peterborough County, Clarington, where we kind of get together and pre-plan our coordinated works. Existing council resolution and priorities for various road segments. So in the report this afternoon, you see Appendix D is a print off from eScribe, which outlines the previous council resolutions for directing staff to include in the 5-year. So those are also taken into consideration. Carryover road segments. So within the 5-year plans, sometimes based on yearly funding models, we don't always get to complete works within those programs in the 5-year plan. So those works are then carried over into the next 5-year plan and prioritized. and then track condition complaints. So the staff tracks condition complaints that are normally phoned in by residents and entered into cases, and then we take those cases and track them and then review them at the time of the development of the 5-year plan and then the yearly budget. So the purpose of the plan is to present, attached to this report, is to present council with a roadmap for the next 5 years for the resurfacing and reconstruction of road segments prioritized in Appendix E of the report this afternoon. Upon sustained program funding of approximately $5 to $9.5 million per year for urban rural reconstruction, $6 to $7.5 million for urban arterial resurfacing, and $5 to $6.5 million for rural resurfacing. Over the next 5-year period, costs are estimated to be within the ranges and to total approximately $116 million worth of now needs and 1 to 5 needs identified in the plan. This document is intended to guide council and staff for coordination and setting priorities over the next 5 years, as well as to inform the asset management plan. Some priorities could change year to year, which will be updated in the plan. Situations that could cause this to happen would be the recoordination of infrastructure projects, requests from boundary roads through other boundary municipalities, and amendments to the yearly funding model based on changes to the asset management plan. Based on those changes, the 5-year plan would be reviewed and amended, and these changes would be reported annually to council through the budget process. Preventative maintenance. In addition to the mentioned capital program, the city also has a program known as Life Cycle Extension, which has been utilized mostly for localized repairs to hardtop roads based on spring breakup or priorities identified by Public Works, council resolutions, and preventive maintenance applications aimed at needs within the 6 to 10-year needs. As part of the program, this is done through types of treatments such as localized asphalt overlays. So that's what we're looking at here is just a picture of an overlay on Royal Oak Road, as well as slurry seals and microsurfacing. Also within that program, we coordinate with Public Works on road segments that are operationally difficult to maintain and are sometimes outside the given plan and the yearly budget. This is done by pulverizing the road segment and maintaining a gravel road segment until it can be resurfaced in a future capital year. For an example, we did that last year with Yelverton Road and Waite Road, where it was pulverized into a gravel road segment, maintained, and then resurfaced this year. Any questions?
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. Let's get a motion to receive the presentation, and we'll see if there's any questions. Moved by Councillor Ashmore to receive, second by Councillor Dunn. Councillor Ashmore, go ahead, sir.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mike. In the report there, you have some roads that are highlighted with yellow. Are those the ones that are proposed to be in the next 5 years? The 5-year plan? I'm not sure. If people read the agenda, not up here, but if they read it online, there's...
Councillor, can we just deal with the report in the next one? This is just the presentation. Okay. We've got the report after. Can I just ask you to hold that question, and when we get to the report, then
that's fine.
I'll come back to you. Is that okay? Any questions on the presentation? We'll do that first. Councillor Richardson, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you. Just a quick question. When we have moved to the high float roads, you had mentioned slurry seals. Is this going to be a process that we're going to adopt so we get longer life cycle out of these roads? If you can just explain a little bit further. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor. Yeah, so the process in the past had been with majority of high flow roads would be to pulverize, or first do base repair, ditching, culvert replacements, pulverize the road, add some gravel. In addition to that, what we're looking at doing is then after that high float application's applied, the following year we follow up with a slurry seal or a sealant type product that seals that top part of the high float. Boundary municipalities have been doing that recently in the last couple of years. Clarington's an example, Scugog is another example, where they seal either that given year or the year after. For us, because we have such a large number of kilometers to do, it'd probably be the year after to get it done in a given year, just due to the temperature that it needs to be done in. that would help extend the life of that high flow road.
Thank you. Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick comment. Good report, Mike. Might be a great idea for the new council if you put a hard copy of Appendix A in their welcome aboard folder, because they're going to be dealing with it for 4 more years. So good report, lots of information. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Helmsley?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Mike, for the report. I'm just wondering, under the structural adequacy rating, you have a black road with unknown structural adequacy. The only one I can find on the map is a road in Woodville, and I'm just wondering, what does unknown structural adequacy mean?
It means stay out of Woodville. Just put your mic on again, Mike, if you would. Put your mic on, yeah.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. So that was probably just for our mapping GIS, identifying a segment of road that, for whatever reason, had a glitch in the data that was provided. So what I'll do, I'll update that and just provide it, because there'll be information for that road segment. But that's probably, it was just to identify it without not leaving it out.
I think the director wants to comment as well, Councillor.
Just for information, the street that you've identified is McCrae Drive, and that is currently under construction in the Mancini subdivision and hasn't been assumed by the municipality.
You are not the director. Is that what you want us to say?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's exactly what I want to say. That's Mancini Phase 2 in Woodville. There's also one at the top end of Lindsay Street. You see on the east side of the river at the north end. That is Riverside Heights. I believe it's under new development, but that has not been assumed, even though the land has been conveyed to the city. It is a dirt road, for the lack of a better word. And I believe that's why those two, and there's a couple other ones in Bob Cajun. Bob Cajun is Hemlin Crescent, I believe. That's Apex, which you're going to be talking about later on today. So there are black roads that were dedicated to the city, but for whatever reason, not constructed.
Thank you. Is that good? Any other questions on the presentation? We have a motion to receive. All in favor? That's passed. Thanks, Mike. We got a report here. Recommendation that report ENG 2022-031 update of roads needs information, roads 5-year plan presentation be received, and that staff update the plan annually based on capital project approvals. And if I might add, let's just add in and changing needs and priorities, and in accordance with the asset management plan. If we get a mover, Councillor Elmsley, second by Councillor Riley. Questions? Councillor Ashmore, you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to Mike. On page 342.
Mike, sorry, are you coming back? We're gonna ask you a question. You can't run out that fast.
I can ask.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Just come on back, Mike. There'll just be a couple of questions on the report. Your name's on the report, so you're on the hook. Right now. Go ahead, Ron.
Thanks. The question was around page 342, 343. You have some areas that are highlighted. Are those the ones that staff are proposing to be in the 5-year capital plan then? Those are the ones you've highlighted? People can't really see this unless they look at the agenda, but I see it here as highlighted in yellow. Maybe I'm the only one that has it, but are those the ones that you've determined that are going to be in the 5-year plan?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Council. So the map, it shows the overall deficiency list, and it breaks it into now needs 1 to 5. So your 1 to 5 is the yellow, and then your light green is or red is now, yellow is 1 to 5, and the green is the 6 to 10. So the objective of the plan is to deal with the now and the 1 to 5 year needs. And there will be some that will probably do the size or length of those road segments, can be dealt with through the life cycle program, and some will probably not make the 5-year plan just due to the reconstruction coordination.
Mike, I think the councillor's referring to this page where some of them are highlighted. You're just questioning what the highlights are for in your report.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. That was, for my purposes, for highlighting the resolutions directing staff to look at those, to include them in the 5-year program or plan. As you'll see, that overall list has a lot of other council resolutions that were included as well. And those highlights only identify the 5-year plan ones to be included.
So those are the resolutions you're highlighting that council's already given that you use to inform part of the 5-year plan, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is correct.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions on the report? We have a motion. All in favor? And that's passed. Thanks, Mike. Okay, we're good for time. Are we okay on 6.4? I know do we have them online? I kind of told them we were running late, so we would do this afternoon, but we sped up now, and so that's all my fault, Sarah. We're going back and forth. So 6.4 is an information update regarding the opioid crisis. I know Sarah, I don't know if Leslie McLaughlin is joining. Yep, she is. There you are. Can you both hear me okay? Okay, go ahead then.
We can, and good morning, Mr. Mayor and Council. I appreciate you guys fitting us in just before lunch, so we'll do our best to keep this brief and high level and stick to the main points. Back a little while ago, you might remember that we asked for some approval for a data sharing agreement with HKPR to provide them real-time data on our 911 response information for opioid-related calls in the community. And after that, there was a request to provide some more information on the status of the opioid situation in the community, as well as the opioid response strategy. So as you can appreciate, it's much larger than any one department. So we've reached out to our partners at HKPR. So on the line, we have Leslie McLaughlin. So Leslie is an RN. She's also the harm and substance reduce coordinator, if I got that right, Leslie, with HKPR District Health Unit, and she's going to provide us an update here today. So thank you, Leslie, for joining us, and take it away.
Thank you so much. Okay, good morning, Mr. Mayor and councillors, and thank you, Deputy Chief Johnson, for the brief introduction. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with a brief introduction. Most people probably don't know who I am. My name is Leslie McLaughlin, and I am a public health nurse. I'm also a local CKL resident. So I work for the Haliburton-Kawartha-Pine District Health Unit, and I've just recently moved into the role of Substance and Harm Reduction Coordinator. And I've been asked to present today specifically about the opioid crisis and the local situation and response. The role of the health unit is basically on the public health lens and the mandates related to substance and harm reduction programming, specifically on surveillance, knowledge exchange, on prevention, health promotion, and the community collaboration and partnerships. And I'm happy to present today to the local effort. And if there's any questions beyond the public health focus, I can refer them to the appropriate community partner and get back to council if necessary. Next slide, please. Thank you. So today I'd like to do an overview on the local situation, look at some data, including opioid overdose deaths, some overdose response related calls, emergency department visits, and some local substance and trends. Also touch on the opioid response plan and overview of the phases and hone in on the response phase specifically, and some of the local partnering strategies, and then the recommended next steps. Next slide, please. So how many people consume substances is a really good question. And unfortunately, it's a very difficult thing to measure. So some of the information that we can get is limited. So the data that we collect has limitations, and some of the data we collect is we cannot break down to specific areas within HKPR. We get it as a whole. and other data can be flawed if there's missing information such as postal codes that don't sort of identify individuals as a local resident. Next slide, please. So one way we look at substance use in the area is looking at trying to describe the local situation in general, which comes from a variety of areas where we obtain data or information from community partners. So one piece that we get is in relation to the drug-related overdose deaths, which comes from the coroner's office. We have partnerships with EMS related to overdose calls, the opioid response or emergency department visits specific to CKL. We can pull from data such as the ACEs data, which is directly from hospital information, and other pieces like information on substance trends through observations through people like EMS, police, and our outreach workers and peer-to-peer support, and public reports. So we also have the ability of obtaining anonymous information from the public to report information on substances of concern in the area, or specifically to overdoses that they've witnessed or experienced. Next slide, please. So here's some information, just regular overdose data that we obtain directly from the Chief Coroner of Ontario. And as you can see, the trend is that from 2019 to 2021, that it has been on the rise, which is not uncommon across Ontario. Unfortunately, the limitation to this data is that we can't receive this or obtain this for the county specific information, so it is just across the district. Next slide, please. So this slide is all about overdose events. The first table here is about the opioid related emergency department visits, and it is specific to City of Kawartha Lakes. So we do have the ability of gathering the data out of specific databases to identify what numbers we've had within the City of Kawartha Lakes. And as you can see, again, the trend, over the last several years has been on the rise as well. And the second table that's on this slide is the number of EMS responses to the opioid-related emergencies. It is by month, and if you look at it, there's no real trend identified from 2021-22, but it does speak to the need of the variety of places that we obtain data from to feed into the surveillance and the response that we have, so that timely identification of increase in overdose events does actually help us understand what's happening and allows us to realize if activation of an alert is needed within the area. Keep in mind some limitations to this data as well, is that not all EMS calls result in an emergency department visit. So some people refuse treatment, some refuse transport, and others never call 911. So definite limitations here. Next slide, please. So another way to try and understand what is happening in the area is looking at local trends. One of the places that we can look at for numbers is in the harm reduction supplies distributed through the programming that we have in place. And we have identified that over the last few years, the inhalation supplies have actually increased in distribution, and the injection supplies have decreased a little bit over the last couple of years. And, understanding that COVID-19 has had impacts, we don't know whether or not that's partially responsible for sort of the trend in changes in what is being distributed, but we do plan to look a little deeper into this. Another piece to take into consideration is sort of drugs of choice and also the poisoned drug supply. So as we know, part of the overdose issue is that the drug supply is poisoned with other substances, which include things like opioids and also reports of benzodiazepines. So the interesting part of these two substances is that they're both what we would consider they have sedative effects. So slowing of the system, but the opioids do have naloxone that can help counteract an overdose related to that substance, but the benzodiazepines do not. In any case, any overdose event, it is recommended that naloxone is given to try and to decrease the effects. And if there are opioids on board, it could potentially help the situation. Next slide, please. So what are we doing? There's a few things that were put in place through a harm reduction program enhancement. One, which is the early warning and surveillance system. There is a link on the HKPR website that does go to a dashboard that looks similar to the picture on the slide. And through there, it is updated weekly with information that we obtain from the multiple sources to identify local trends and to be transparent on what's happening within the area. And as well on there, there is the link to the anonymous reporting tool where community members can anonymously enter information about substances of concern or the overdoses that have been happening, another area that we are interested in gathering data about. Other pieces that are happening, the naloxone distribution and training programs, so public health units, including ours and their designates, are required to, well, the health unit is required to act as a naloxone distribution lead. So that's what we do through the health unit, and we have other community partners who we onboard for distributing partners so that naloxone can be distributed in multiple areas and locations throughout the regions, especially to our priority populations. And then the other part is the local opioid response plan. Again, a plan to implement and maintain, to expand on what we either have or had for opioid related programming, and it's based on the assessment of the local data and community needs. Next slide, please. So specifically talking about the opioid response plan, there are 4 phases in the report. The first phase is the prevention phase, obviously one of the most cost-effective and long-lasting ways to reduce harms associated with substance use and to help prevent them from happening through education and awareness. We've got the preparedness phase, which includes the creation of the interagency task force, the development of the enhanced surveillance and warning system, and to develop the response plan and communication strategies. The response phase in itself, so this is initiated when the number of events exceeds a specific threshold, and like all emergencies, a recovery phase where the de-escalation of these response activities come down and discussions had on how to move forward. Next slide, please. So in relation to the response piece and the response pathway, it originally starts with a detection of an increase in overdoses. So this could be a trigger identified from a partner agency or through our surveillance and the monitoring of the data that the health unit particularly does throughout the week and notices an increase. Then what happens is there's a risk assessment. So if a trigger is identified, there is collaboration and cooperation between community partners of the task force to talk about what that looks like and to decide whether or not something like an alert needs to go out. So a validation process is in place to see how to move forward with the indicated numbers. If it is indicated that the response phase needs to be put into place, escalation of the things that can be implemented happens. So task members and outreach partners are notified. A draft and approved alert is then issued, which then leads to other pieces of implementation, which includes an enhanced surveillance of the task force members, increased communication strategies, and increased distribution of naloxone, including through our outreach workers and community partners. Next slide, please. So some of the response phase, as you heard before, is definitely in partnership and has a lot of collaborative efforts. So specifically the opioid surveillance and alert notification system, it is held by the health unit, but it would not exist without the partnerships that we have to collect the data and understand what's happening in our community. We have the naloxone distribution. Again, the health unit may be a lead organization on that, but without our community partners, identified agencies within the community, we wouldn't be able to distribute as far and wide as we do without that. So that includes outreach partners like Parn and John Howard Society, treatment partners, and things like that. And then there's also naloxone distribution through pharmacies as well. So some local pharmacies opt into a naloxone distribution program, and they can also distribute if someone enters in and asks for this opportunity. And there's also education. So education involving social media, our peer-to-peer education when they're out and seeing individuals who are using substances. We've got outreach workers, and then just the broader communication to increase education and awareness about substances. The treatment, one of the pieces is obvious, the administration of naloxone, hospitalization, and support services that are available within our community. And then the big, broad community promotion, so communication, media channels, including Facebook posts, media releases, etc., that can share information. Next slide, please. So how can we strengthen our response? As you probably know, most programming is in some sort of restoration phase. So one of the big pieces that we need to look at is to evaluate the impacts that COVID-19 has had on the population. And then in order to do that, we have the health units committed to doing what we call a situational assessment. We're looking at the local needs in relation to substance use. And we've identified the need for that is actually through our community-based data, which we would try and obtain through our outreach workers to reach that population to obtain some data. Another piece is to strengthen the opioid surveillance and alert notification system. So one of the big pieces we would like to increase promotion on is the ability for people to anonymously report the substances of concern or overdoses that are happening that may or may not have had other community partners involved in, like EMS. It would be a definite benefit to the system to have more information obtained from people who use substances to understand the lens and what's happening locally. Continuous promotion and availability of naloxone is always a piece that goes hand in hand with the work we do. It is, like I said, available through some local pharmacies, obviously the health unit, and many other community partners. And potentially promoting the website through the Ministry of Health, ontario.ca, where you can search where can I get naloxone, enter in a city or a postal code, and it actually identifies local agencies that you're able to get naloxone from. And lastly, a recommendation to linking to the community safety and well-being plans. There are overlaps in priorities, specifically mental health and addictions, to help minimize replicated efforts and to increase the health and safety of our community. Next slide, please. Any questions?
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you for the update. Leslie and Sarah, your presentation. I'll get a motion to receive. We'll see if there's any questions. Councillor Seymour Fagan, second by Councillor Ashmore. Councillor Seymour Fagan, you had a question? Go ahead.
Thank you, through you. Thank you, Leslie, for the in-depth report. So I understand everything that you're doing when we already have the problem. Can you please explain to me what HKPR is doing about the problem, why it happened, which is we have a mental health crisis, and that's the root of the problem. So I'm just wondering what HKPR is doing about this.
Thank you, and through you, the mayor, to the councillor. There are many different areas that we are trying to look at. There is a 4-pillar strategy, which does include the prevention, promotion aspects to it. There are mental health working groups that are working collaboratively to try and identify what the needs are within our community, because we do recognize the overlap of mental health and substance use. Thank you.
Thank you. And does HKPR provide support? Because I know that the support systems are failing out there for the mental health all throughout our entire healthcare system.
So thank you, through you, the mayor, to the councillor. The health unit does not specifically provide counseling to individuals with mental health concerns or substance use disorders. It would be a referral to our treatment and support within the community. So strengthening those ties in the community, I think, would be definitely a benefit.
Thank you. Councillor Ashmore.
Through you to Mr. Mayor, to Leslie, thanks for the presentation. One of the things you mentioned was prevention, and would the health unit and would you personally yourself be in favor of getting these hard drugs off the street to begin with and make them less accessible? I understand people have addiction problems and they need help and they need our help and our care. But when we, I hate to use the word normalize, but normalize that we're almost normalizing the fact that hard drugs are on the street and we need the treatment for it, for these opioids. But are you working with other agencies? I know the police can only do so much, but to stop these substances from coming into our communities. They're just having such a havoc on especially our young people, whose lives are just going downhill when they enter into this type of a lifestyle and taking these drugs. Are we trying to prevent these from coming into our communities? Are we going to put more emphasis on that?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. Our strategies are all about harm reduction, and the goal is to decrease the harm associated with substance consumption through the interventions, and it's very client-centered, meeting people where they're at, and it does not require people who consume substances to abstain or stop from using substances.
It's probably part of the education as well. Okay.
Education, for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Helmsley.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. I just wondered if you knew if the numbers for 2022 were up over 2021, or if you haven't seen those statistics yet.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. Some of the information, as you can see, comes collectively to the health unit. So depending on what numbers you're looking at, we may or may not be able to see what's happening. But overall, we usually look at it on a year-to-year basis for things like overdoses, the fatalities that are associated with those. And to speak to something locally that we were looking at just the other day, you know, in relation to something like calls associated with overdose emergencies, they have not passed last year's that I'm aware of.
Thank you. We have a motion to receive. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you, Leslie, for your update, and thank you once again, Sarah. Appreciate it. Have a good day. We are going to recess the meeting, and we will reconvene at 1 o'clock sharp. Don't be late. Thank you.